I'm going to call to order the regular council meeting number 1523 for October 6th. And in honor of the Liwat-Tuol, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwat Nation. This meeting of council is being held virtually with all meeting participants attending via electronic communications in order to adhere to the provincial health officer's orders respecting physical distancing requirements as a measure to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. Council members will be involved in and participate in the meeting virtually as they would in person. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and is being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. Members of the public who wish to ask questions during open question period at the end of the meeting will be able to do so, and I will provide instructions at that time. Before I ask for approval of the agenda, I'd like to make one amendment. We are going to remove, let me just get the number, 11A, the procedure bylaw amendment. We have to give 2 weeks notice in the public newspaper for this amendment to be read. And unfortunately, there was a bit of a mix-up and our local paper didn't publish the advertisement this week. So we're gonna have to do the full publication for 2 weeks before we consider this amendment. Are there any other amendments to the agenda? Councillor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. I'd like to add hillside development guidelines and how they apply to Sunstone in regards to retaining walls.
Okay. Where would you like to add that?
Wherever the administrator feels comfortable.
Would be a late item.
Thank you.
So we would have to do a motion to approve the late item.
So Councillor Craddock, I'll wait for the helicopter to pass overhead.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Craddock, I'll look for a motion for decision on late business to add hillside development standards at the late business on item number 15, please.
Thank you very much.
Any other amendments? Councillor Zant.
Second.
So you're going to move the agenda as amended, Councillor Zant?
Correct. Yes.
Look for a seconder on that. Councillor Noble, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from regular council meeting 1522 from September 15th. Moved by Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from that? Seeing none. Rise with a report from in camera. Ms. Fraser, did you send me that resolution?
Yes, I did.
There it is. So our rise report is that this is from our in-camera meeting from this afternoon, and that's that staff be directed to advise all airport leaseholders that the village requires sudden and accidental insurance coverage up to $250,000, and that a higher threshold for leaseholders that facilitate fuel storage be required, and that environmental impairment insurance for gradual pollution not be required. Can I get a motion?
We don't need a motion.
Oh, we don't need a motion on that. No. Business arising from committee of the whole. We have committee minutes, nothing from committee of the whole. We have committee minutes from the mayor's task force. We'll be talking about the task force in the next item. Can I get a motion to receive the minutes?
Motion to receive.
Councillor Zant, second by Councillor Noble. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. And that will take us to 8, the Mayor's Task Force for COVID Response and Recovery. We're going to wait for Ms. Brooksbank, who's going to present on this.
I'm going to start actually on this one as far as the resolution.
Okay, go ahead.
So at the Mayor's Task Force, there was a conversation on, in light of not maybe having a large event, because it's probably not the appropriate time to be having a large event in the face of sort of restrictions being imposed from Dr. Bonnie Henry. So one of the other thoughts that came up was whether or not there could be some use of our remaining community enhancement funds by providing it to community groups who have small little, maybe they want to have a little, not event maybe that brings a bunch of individuals to them, but these little pop-ups, maybe it's another Pemberton Arts Council pop-up event that kind of puts light and activates the downtown. And so the Mayor's Task Force thought that that would be a good idea and wanted to put that recommendation forward to council. So this is before council for consideration. Just for council's information, the remaining pot in the remaining funds in the pot is $1,250. So it's slim, yeah.
So
And we haven't actually gone out to community groups. We haven't actually been asked for the funds yet. It was just sort of a way to knowing that there aren't a lot of activities that most likely will be happening from here to the end of the year, that it might be a nice thing to see if community groups have any interest in doing some activations.
So maybe if I could add a little context to that, through our process, as we reported on last time at the task force, we came up with a number of, or 4, what we called big ideas to work on. And we'll get into more of that shortly, but one of them was a Pemberton Day where we would, you know, and it was geared towards a few things. It was geared towards mental health and recognizing that as we get into the second wave and the dark of the fall and the winter, that sense of isolation is going to grow. And this was a way of sort of bringing the community out and strengthening our connections. Through further discussion, as the CEO mentioned, we kind of went, well, you know, having that sort of event might not be the best or the safest or the right idea for this time. So we haven't canceled it, but we postponed it until the time we feel we could hold it. That makes more sense. And sort of to replace that or to help fill that gap and encourage some activities that will, again, be good for mental health, be good to combat isolation, be good to bring the community together in different ways. We thought we would engage our local community groups that are normally busy planning the barn dance or wine and cheese or whatever it is, ways to, you know, find some activities for our community. So we thought if we gave them access to the community enhancement fund, that might be a way to do it. Unfortunately, we only have $1,200, but that's sort of what's up for discussion. We'll talk about some of the other initiatives from the task force in a bit, but that's what Ms. Gilmore is referring to. So do you want to discuss that item in isolation, or do we want Ms. Brooksbank to sort of give us the update on the Mayor's Task Force?
We can, Ms. Brooksbank, do you want to give a little update on our last meeting?
That seemed like so long ago.
I know.
It's only 2 weeks. It was a week and a half.
Well,
I guess maybe the hub. We could focus on the hub a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. So we, as Mayor Richmond indicated, we sort of we brought forth those 4 big ideas, which included the virtual hub, a physical hub, the safe event, if you will, and then community activations / public art. And so, as Mayor Richmond indicated, there was much discussion about the event and also what perhaps the Mayor's Task Force should be focusing on. So the 2 projects that we landed on and that we sort of have the capacity to initiate at this time would be the virtual hub, in addition to perhaps supporting local groups to do various activations, as CAO Gilmore indicated. So whether it be supporting them to do a public art piece, whether it be, holding some sort of, COVID safe holiday event at the barn where people could space. It's just basically empowering community groups to help support the community. And of course, all of that would have to be vetted through Vancouver Coastal Health to ensure that it meets the safety guidelines. But it's just a way of as Mayor Richmond indicated, just creating that connectedness as we go into these darker, longer days.
So the recommendation to council is to, again, in some form, give access to these community groups to our community enhancement fund to allow for these sorts of activities.
Mm-hmm. And I would go a little step further, maybe that the Mayor's Task Force be the ones who would be able to distribute those.
Mm-hmm. And so again, that's that's the recommendation. We're going to look for council to discuss and approve or not. The other side of our meeting was everything that Ms. Brooksbank just mentioned, and as well as, you know, continuing to look at things that have come up through this thought exchange and our appeal to the public to understand what issues we should be looking at. So, you know, there was a discussion around childcare and transit and those sorts of things, and how we can, through the task force, coordinate advocacy and coordinate efforts. Kind of after the fact, through email, there was a discussion about you know, a program for having Love Pemberton masks to encourage the wearing of masks moving forward, and can we provide Love Pemberton masks and build on that. So there's other activities going on. Right now, the main projects are that virtual hub, which is, again, a sort of a centralization of services and information. And there's some really good work being done on that currently. Yeah, and the physical hub, we, as I said last time, we kind of put on hold to see how the virtual hub does provide access and what other needs come out physically before we make that decision. So that's sort of where we're at as a group on that. And again, right now for discussion is the recommendation to access the community enhancement funds. So any questions or thoughts? Councillor Craddock.
Thanks very much, Mayor Richmond. What amount of the funds were you looking to use?
Well, originally we were not big numbers. We were talking about offering each group, you know, groups the access to something like, you know, we thought we had a little more funds in that pool, in that bucket. We were talking about, you know, $500 a group or something like that. And at this point, we only have $1,200 until the new budget. And normally, you know, if you think about it, when our community enhancement fund, when we discuss it at budget time, there's a number of events that we support throughout the year that probably aren't going to run. So, you know, this is, you know, an access to the funds now, but in a few months, there'll be more funds available. And, you know, I think the idea is to continue that access to those funds so that we can have some community activities throughout the fall and the winter. So there's no real dollar amount, Councillor Craddock, to add to it. Staff, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, given the amounts, I would say probably the remaining funds would be allocated to the mayor's task force. I mean, if you have, I mean, depending on what the application would be, unless council wanted to cap it at a certain amount. But again, there's not a lot left there.
Mm-hmm. Until January.
I guess, Mayor, the reason I bring it up is normally, excuse me, come December, we allocate you know, $500 normally to the food bank. And this year being a really tough year for community members and employment not improving very much, if we were to do that, then you're down to $700. So I guess that's something I want to take into consideration at this time, because it's only another month away. We have to make that decision. So it doesn't leave a whole bunch of money, that's for sure. I want to support the local initiatives on your mayor's task force, but we need some money for other things.
So the food bank, that's a really good one to bring up. Is that one that would come out of this year's budget, or would that come out of next year's budget, Ms. Fraser?
It would come out of this year's budget, and I'm just going to check. The food bank did things a bit differently last year, so I want to just check and see what we, just stand by for a moment here. So last year, we, I don't, we did the Lilwat Christmas Bureau, $250,000, we're generous. And yeah, so we, last year we provided funding to the Lilwat Christmas Bureau. The food bank did things a bit differently, and they did not make a request to us last year. But having said that, I'm sure that they would welcome any funds that are provided through from any organization.
I mean, I think quite reasonably at this point, it's October. If we make this offer to access some of this funding to provide activities for our community, chances are the planning of and and execution of these activities will be in the next budget cycle.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, I'm wrong. I am sorry, incorrect. We did give it, so it's the Christmas hamper program, not the food bank itself, but the Christmas hamper program is what we supported through Sea to Sky Community Services, along with the Lilwat Christmas Bureau. So
To a total of what?
$250 each.
So
Yeah.
that would leave $700, which is obviously not very much. But I guess, what I'm asking council to consider is once we get into our new budget cycle with the CEF, there will be some of the regular requests. Some of the regular requests will be absent. So are we willing to provide some of these funds towards these activities? Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, I'd be, excuse me, I'd be willing to put a motion on the floor that we allocate up to $700 this year from the fund towards the Mayor's Task Force initiatives, with further funding coming from next year's budget.
Okay, can I get a seconder for discussion? Councillor Zan, discussion on the motion?
The reason I'm putting that forward, I would still like to hold back that $500 for the food bank for this year.
Agreed.
Would council like to make a resolution to make that allocation at this meeting? So that we can let them know. And
If you want a second motion to that, I would move that we retain.
Let's vote on the first motion and then you can make that second motion. Agreement.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on the first motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Craddock.
I guess I'm not sure if we're going to split it between the two groups or not this year, but I think we can wait and see what the application is, but we can retain that money towards food bank or First Nations contributions.
so food bank or Christmas hamper programs?
Correct. Thank you.
You need that. Is that a motion or is that just
Yes.
hold back? That's a motion. Okay. Seconder. Councillor Noble, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks for that. And again, we're just really trying to encourage our community groups they're hungry too, and then looking for ways to provide these social outlets and ways of connecting our residents. So happy to support them. And again, I'm really excited about the virtual hub. There's been some good work done on that and some more things coming. And I think it's really going to give people the ability to one-stop shop, find out information, exchange services, all that sort of thing. So I'm looking forward to watching that come together. Okay. Committee rise with report. No, we just did that. Community Enhancement Fund.
Oh, we just did that one, did we? No,
Foundation.
Community Foundation. Mhm.
There we go. Community Foundation of Worcester grant application. Ms. Brooksbank?
Yeah, so as Mayor Richmond indicated, one of the projects that the Mayor's Task Force had identified as a priority for implementation was this virtual hub. One of the task force members, Jay from Sea to Sky Community Services, had indicated that there was a fast approaching deadline for the Community Foundation of Whistler. And the program is called sorry, just bear with me here. It was the Emergency Fund. And so basically it's meant to support initiatives that support communities through the COVID-19 pandemic. So after discussion with the Mayor's Task Force, we had decided that perhaps we could put forth a funding application on behalf of the Mayor's Task Force from the Village of Pemberton to ask for funding for the virtual hub. And what that basically entails is the Village of Pemberton would host this hub. We would create a separate landing page for it and website address. And then staff would update that hub. And then to also complement that, and sorry, I should backtrack a little bit. So the intent of this hub is basically to provide timely information and updates with respect to COVID-19, anything from like PHO orders to school district updates to health information to mental health supports. Like this is meant to be this one-stop shop that serves the entire community. But given that, it's important that, accessibility is top of mind when we do things like this. And so it was identified by actually both Sea to Sky and Sea to Sky Community Services and Work BC that there's a bit of a technology gap. There are several community members that both those organizations serve that don't have access to technology. And those people would certainly benefit from having access to the hub. So part of our funding request to the CFOW was, one, to fund the development of this hub, and then two, to also buy 10 pay-as-you-go phones in addition to the services that go along with it for a year. So we had requested 10,750 to do this, and then if staff updates the hub, that's an in-kind amount, and that equates to about $7,500. So that we do expect to hear if our funding application has been successful, I'd say within the next week or so. And then I've also been in touch with other funders who are quite interested in this project and very supportive of the work of the Mayor's Task Force. So my hope is we'll be able to come up with some additional funding for this initiative as well.
Thank you. Any questions? Any thoughts, or somebody like to make the motion?
Make the motion.
Second.
Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble.
We just don't have a motion on that.
I thought the motion was to support the grant application fund, or is it just an update for receipt?
Update
Yeah.
for.
The funding application has been submitted.
Oh, okay, so update for,
Yeah.
so motion received, Councillor Zant, seconded by Councillor Noble, all in favor. Opposed, motion carries. We have no delegations. Reports, Office of the CAO, resubmission of Childcare BC New Spaces grant application.
Do we want to do that first, or do we want to consider?
Oh, right, sorry.
Okay.
So we have a couple of people, or a couple of attendees who are, I believe, waiting to hear the discussion around our correspondence for action. The only item there, number one, which is seeking council support for proclamation of October 21st World Polio Day. I'm looking for a motion to move this up in the agenda for discussion. Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Zant. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. So the correspondence is before you. Are there any questions or thoughts, or would someone like to make a motion? Councillor Zant.
One question. Well, I mean, I support the letter. I'm just wondering, are there any other groups or any other groups that have October 24th earmarked as a specific date for their causes? I just want to make sure we don't step on toes is what I'm
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. There's no further discussion. I'll make the motion to support it.
Okay, seconder. Any discussion?
I believe you need to make the proclamation.
Yeah.
So there is a proclamation that is attached.
What page is it on?
It's on
93.
page 100. Oh, sorry, no, I lied. That's the wrong one. Sorry. Proclamation is on page 96.
So I don't think I called the question, first of all. Let me call the question, then I'll read the proclamation. So call the question, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 90, oh, I see. There's one on 95 and one on 90, or it's all the same, 95 and 96. It's long. All right, here we go. Whereas in 1985, Rotary International launched Polio Plus and spearheaded the Global Polio Eradication Initiative with the World Health Organization, U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that has immunized over 2.5 billion children to date. And whereas polio cases have dropped by 99.9% from 350,088 to 22 in 2017, and the world stands on the threshold of eradicating the disease forever. And whereas to date, Rotary has contributed 1.8 billion US and is working to raise an additional 150 million to be matched with a 300 million grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Whereas World Polio Day is celebrated around the globe on October 24th, it was established by Rotary International over a decade ago to commemorate the birth of Jonas Salk, who in 1955 led the first team to develop a vaccine against poliomyelitis. And whereas there are 50 Rotary clubs with over 1,450 members in Rotary District 5040, BC, and 2 Rotary clubs with over 40 members in Whistler, all committed to the eradication of polio and sponsoring service projects to address such critical issues as poverty, health, hunger, illiteracy, and the environment in their local communities and abroad. Now, therefore, I, Mike Richmond, Mayor of the Village of Pemberton, and Council, do hereby proclaim October 24th, 2020 as World Polio Day in the Village of Pemberton and encourage all citizens to join us and Rotary International in the campaign for a polio-free world. Okay, thanks for that. So we'll go back to Office of the CAO, the resubmission of the childcare new spaces grant application.
So we wanted to bring this back to have a conversation with council. We don't have a formal resolution to resubmit. And I think from a staff perspective, given the criteria that we don't meet necessarily the threshold for childcare space, and given the conversation we had with the daycare, meaning they need us to really focus on increasing the ECE wages, we're not 100% certain that this is the right time to apply for this funding. But of course, we want to hear how council feels about this. I think we have a good next step with the partnership that we formed with Sea to Sky Community Services and considering spaces there. And however, we're not ready to apply for anything for those spaces. But we're just wondering what benefit there might be for resubmitting when we know we don't qualify. Just wanting to know if this is something we wanted to spend time on at this point, knowing we won't get the funding.
So to add to that, we had a meeting, I was going to do this in my mayor's report, but one of the minister's meetings we had a couple of weeks ago was with the Minister of Childcare. And we talked about a number of things. We talked about the insufficient wages for childcare workers, training opportunities, all that sort of thing, but definitely focused on wages and focused a lot as well on our failed application from last year and how disappointed we were and how the criteria that they put forward still doesn't fit for us. We can resubmit, but the application is not going to change. So from my perspective, I hear the CAO's comments. I also don't want to walk away from that argument. So actually 2 things. So number one, that's number one. Number 2, we're also working with Sea to Sky Community Services in that partnership to see if we can come up with an affordable housing project that would also accommodate Sea to Sky Community Services. And the idea is, well, if we can combine that project with the daycare project, we can put daycare in there. There could be potentially housing for daycare workers, affordable. There's some good synergy there, and maybe that's where we should focus our attention. Having said that, in my mind, in an ideal world, or ultimately, we would get both of these projects off the ground. We would increase our daycare space, and we would get this project with Sea to Sky Community Services. Again, I was going to report on this. I've had a couple meetings with Sea to Sky Community Services, looking at properties for the project, looking at funding abilities, and discussing, combining the daycare thing with it. And that's a little while away, a little time away. We would be looking at going to BC Housing maybe in January for some funding. So part of me, honestly, wants to continue looking at both projects. Like I said to the minister, and we've talked about before, the criteria for the grant spaces or the child spaces grant doesn't fit us. It's not a one size fits all. And I'd like to continue fighting that fight. I'd like to continue sort of going to the ministry and saying, hey, that doesn't work. We need those spaces, as well as on the other side, working for affordable housing project. Maybe we have to combine the projects and go to both funding pools to pull it all together and be very creative about it. But I'm just throwing that out there. I feel like my conversation with the minister a couple of weeks ago was, this doesn't work for us. the cost of development in Pemberton is such that 40,000 per child space will never work, et cetera, et cetera. So I would kind of like to keep that conversation going on and not give up on that. You know, and as much as what we heard today was, you know, spaces are great, but, you know, having the workers to fill them is even more important. We can continue working that way. So I just want to throw that out for some context for the conversation. You know, the question from staff is, do we reapply, resubmit for this grant stream, or do we wait and look and maybe combine it with this other project and see if we can be more successful that way? So that's essentially what's up for discussion here. Questions and thoughts? Councilor Craddock.
I guess for me, in talking to the young families in town, childcare, I think, as we all know, is the absolute top priority. On that phone call with you to the minister, it's obvious we're not going to get the $60 at the next intake, which is coming up shortly. I think it's as important to the community as anything we've got going. So I'm just going to throw this out for conversation. Can we go back and put it in at $40 a space, which leaves $20 a space shortage, which is $480,000. Can the community pick up that on long-term funding? I think the community right now really needs that space if they're going to get mums back to work, and if we're going to get careers back on track, and if we're going to have kids looked after. So I guess I'm trying to find kind of a middle road here by saying, well, you pay 40, we'll find the other 20. Because if we wait till next year and the new government, and we don't know who the minister is going to be or which government, all these things could change. There may not be any funding next year. So I'm just going to throw that out to Mayor Richmond as just a talking point, but I've been looking at this really closely, and I think if we could get 40, I don't think the community would be upset with council if we said we're going to carry some long-term funding for the balance, about $480,000, to get this childcare up and running, hopefully within a year and a half.
Thank you. Any thoughts on that or other thoughts from council? Councilor Antonelli.
I think we should continue to submit for that pool of funding. I think it would be worthwhile to include in the application the conversation about Vancouver's funding that they were allocated because of their elevated construction costs. So, you know, I think we do have a viable application. I think another thing for us to consider, along with what Councillor Craddock just said, is that, you know, we might benefit from having some kind of project manager, something like that, to bring the construction on rather than going with, you know, a construction company, because we know that the profit margin in there is what is, you know, a big contributor to what the construction costs are. So I think we should try and be creative and think about ways to bring this forward, because yeah, it's super important.
Thank you. I support most of what you said there. I mean, with the exception, not the exception, but the application was pretty bare bones, and I hear you. The profit margin on there is something maybe we can recuperate or claw back. We don't really have the staff on hand at this point to be able to do that. We would have to contract or figure out a way to pay for that still. I tend to agree with you that let's keep plugging away. I mean, you know, the message I had for the minister was, this doesn't fit. We need to have a conversation. And she, you know, said a lot of nice things, blew a lot of smoke, told us how, you know, she really supports applications like Pemberton's, recognizes that we're 30% below the provincial average, has learned a lot from our case, which to which I responded, that's great, but that doesn't help us out. And you're encouraging us to resubmit, but the criteria is the same, and that won't change much unless, you know, we look at an idea like Councilor Craddock's. That's not going to change much in terms of the per square, you know, the 40,000 to 60,000 per square or per child space. I was quite clear that I wasn't going away, that we, the Village of Pemberton, were going to be pounding hard on this door with her and whoever else to keep reapplying. So, you know, the stubborn part of me wants to reapply. I know staff is scratching their head going, well, let's not spend time and staff time and resources on something that we feel we're going to fail at because the criteria doesn't match. Like I say, the stubborn part of me wants to keep pounding at the ministry, whoever that ends up being in a month or two's time, the minister, and say, this has to change, you know, whether it's like you said, Councillor Antonelli, citing the Vancouver example, as well as just the fact that we are so below the provincial average. We're such an easy business case to make. So again, my instincts, my character, my personality, let's keep hammering away. I know that staff is reluctant because, and fairly so, because you know, we don't want to spend time resubmitting for something that we pretty much are being told we're going to fail at. So, yeah. Councillor Zant.
Oh, Ms. Gilmore, I think was first.
No, that's okay. I can wait. I'm just making notes. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I support the resubmission of for this grant, and I definitely like the creative ideas that Councillor Craddock and the comments by Councillor Antonelli as well. My only question was in regards to staff time to resubmit. Do we have the capacity for that at this point?
Well, that's a great question. What would we have to do to resubmit, and how? What kind of like I say, I don't feel there's many changes to make to the submission because we've.
Right.
No, that's a great question.
So that's why I'm asking.
Well, typically, and I don't know why they've changed this format, but typically it's not in a Word document that you submit, or an application that you already had that we just press send on again. So you go into an online platform, you have to enter into every field, sort of what we had before, and then you upload it. So it's, I mean, we probably wouldn't have a lot of changes, but there would be more than just clicking send again.
In regards to the, sorry, go ahead.
So I don't know exactly how long. I mean, we're not having to do research. I would say 15 to 20 hours is one that we would do when we're starting sort of from scratch. But we'd probably want to do some double checking. Maybe it'd be 5 hours. I'm not sure.
Go ahead, Councillor Zant.
In regards to Councillor Craddock's idea with the council or the village picking up the extra $20, where would that discussion fit into, or would that be the budget for 2021 then?
Well, so there's a little bit more that would be involved, which is about a 6-month process. And we would need to go to one of two methods for borrowing over 5 years, which would be an alternative approval process or a referendum. So, I mean, it would most likely be that it would be an alternative approval process. We usually tie referendums in with elections. And so that's really where the electorate comes in and opposes, would sign a form and would oppose the borrowing or securing of additional funds. So that can be done at any time if council wants to go ahead and consider that.
What is the submission date for this next intake?
November 1st.
November 1st. So even if we were to consider moving ahead with tying it to the other project, we can sort of do that after the fact, so to speak, or, you know.
Well, we have to submit a design. We had a preliminary design. So, and it's based all of the, whether it's the outdoor playground or the fencing, it was designed for that particular area. So we wouldn't have anything, we wouldn't be able to swap midway or after we got funding to say, hey, we're just going to reallocate it towards this project. That they wouldn't entertain something like that. That's
no, what I'm getting at is that if we resubmit for November 1st, as we move through the rest of the process on the other project, we could find out the results of this application.
Yep.
And decide how to switch gear on the other one. I think the timing actually fits a bit. Ms. Brooksbank, I'd be happy to hear your input. You're deep in this. If you want to add anything to the conversation for council.
Yeah, so one of the things that has changed since the minister meetings, of course, as everyone knows, is the snap election. And so what it end up I'm actually learning about this process. I had no idea, but what ends up happening when there is an election, it, I don't know if I'm using the right term, but it kind of dissolves the government. And then, excuse me, provincial civil servants go into what is called the Caretakers Convention. And so what that means is staff are not able to promote any government services from the previous government. So what that means is we don't have that support or assistance from the ministry staff to help us work through our application like what we had last time. Because I believe Mayor Richmond in one of your meetings, they encouraged us to work with ministry staff on the application. But again, that was prior to the snap election being announced. So we do have that challenge. And I know that they were keen to work with us, and they did provide some other suggestions, like perhaps entertaining having before and after care in that same space. But that unfortunately doesn't work because the Children's Center hours are from 7:30 to 5:30, so that wouldn't work. So we can't use that as a multi-purpose room in that regard. So that's one thing to consider. And I guess my other thing is, I think, you know, I would assume we would probably need to get some sort of support from the Children's Center board on this regard to see if they are still in fact interested in pursuing this. And I would, the other thing that too is just it, you know, the children's, the needs assessment had indicated that we have 12.5 spaces per 100 children. And that proposed addition to the facility doesn't even come close to meeting the existing need. And I know some spaces are better than no spaces, but it just, I feel like we were trying to fit within the parameters of the funding application and fit within the parameters of the land, and not really putting sort of like a well thought, well planned proposal in. We had to meet a deadline and we did that. And I think we did a great job at doing that. But I worry that potentially if we do apply for this this intake and get it, what does that mean for any future applications and potentially a purpose-built facility? And again, no one knows. I did speak to the ministry to find out like what future intakes might look like and if they're a possibility, but they can't even comment on that at this point because of that Caretakers Convention. So it's hard to know.
It is hard to know, and it's hard to know whether these, you know, November 1st is the deadline, but it could be till the end of November before we know who the government is and what does that mean for these applications and the timelines. So it is hard to know. And again, I'm of a personality where I'll go for all of it all the time. I understand that there's concern about having the workers to fill these spaces or to be able to staff these spaces. But I also feel that we can't wait for one for the other. We have to grab any opportunity there is for funding. And that's I guess what my concern is, missing out on any opportunity to fund childcare spaces. Our childcare needs assessment identified as one of the top ones, if not the top one, was creating new spaces. As well, it was training opportunities, as well, it was rezoning. We're doing all those things. But number one was create new spaces. And no, it only puts a dent in our problem, but, you know, or it's a small fix, but I just don't want to miss. We are so opportunistic in nature. We have to seize any grant opportunity that's out there. If we have the ability to resubmit without a ton of work, because it's fairly similar to last time, at least we're still on the radar. That's sort of the way my brain works. We're still on the radar. We could still carry that conversation with whoever the Minister of Childcare is in a couple of months. You know, the other side of it is, as Ms. Brooksbanks points out, you know, or do we pause and put a whole different application project, depending on streams coming up, partner with this other project? I don't know. I'm looking at council for some input here. Councillor Xanth and Councillor Craddock.
I was just going to say, if there's no more discussion, I would make the motion to make a resubmission for the childcare space grant application.
Okay, let's get a seconder for discussion, and then we can either make amendments. Councillor Craddock, go ahead for discussion. I've got Councillor Craddock, then Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I guess for me, if we get 24 spaces approved now, that isn't what we needed. But we've also got some private people that are trying to look at putting some spaces in. And there's other facilities that are coming along thinking the same thing. So, you know, the longer we put this off, the harder it's going to be for families to survive. So my feeling is always take a chance at what's there right now. Like you say, Mayor Richmond, don't give up the ship, but at the same time, let's be realistic. If we're not going to get full funding, let's try and find a way to make it work so we can get some of these families some childcare.
Councillor Antonelli?
I was just going to agree. Yeah, I think, yeah, that we should resubmit.
Okay, so we've got a motion to resubmit the application, and is that motion to resubmit the application pretty much in its current form? Councillor Craddock?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if council is agreeable, that if they come back and say, look, we can accept it, but only at 40, then I certainly want council to be able to have the opportunity to say, okay, we'll take the 40 and we'll subsidize the rest. I don't want to lose out on the 40 and wait a year and a half down the road to get these families support. So I don't know how we're going to do that, Mayor Richmond, but I don't want to lose any opportunity.
Ms. Gilmore?
I just to be clear, staff's not opposed to applying for money for daycare spaces. I just want to put that out first and foremost. But the difference between this application and the last one is that they say explicitly in bold on the very first line that you read is that the childcare spaces are limited to $40,000 per childcare space. And that's the only, if they would say 60,000 or unlimited, we would be like, let's go forward. I mean, some of the options that Councillor Craddock's putting forward to help subsidize or help fund that other portion would be creative. It's uncertain, but it's something else that would make probably the application more feasible. I don't know in its current state, we would be doing work knowing well that we aren't getting funded because we're outside of that limit. So that's the only reason that we were putting it forward. It's just because of that one caveat, that one bolded line that they have in their application, process.
And I hear you loud and clear, absolutely. I guess where I differ is that we took the message to the minister, and I'll take it to the next minister, and I'll take it to whoever I can get audience with, that does not fit us. And that was our message, was your criteria does not work across the province. Do I feel like I got a lot of ground by making that case with the minister? No, quite honestly. But I'm quite willing to keep making that case. So to me, if we're resubmitting as is. You know, if we have to discuss after the fact, as Councillor Craddock's suggestion is, then let's be open to that. But in the meantime, we're resubmitting as is. And as soon as that submission gets sent, whenever government is formed, I want to start sending emails and texts or emails and letters to the minister saying, I need your ear on this. I need to talk to you on this. And continue sending that message that $40,000 threshold does not work in our community with the development costs. That's the message we took a couple weeks ago. I'm willing to keep taking that message. So not looking for staff to change the submission. I know it feels like we're putting something that's we're already being told we're going to fail at, but I'm willing to keep banging that drum. So go ahead, Councillor Zant.
I was going to say, does the motion need to clarify Councillor Craddock's thought about the subsidization by AAP or referendum?
You know, we could add a friendly amendment that suggests that if we're refused the 40,000 or the 60,000 application, that it comes back to us for a conversation to see if there's other ways to fund it, i.e. long-term borrowing. I don't know if that qualifies as a friendly amendment.
Well, I just want to make sure that it's if it needs to be mentioned.
So that's, if we put that amendment, that is your motion, Councillor Zant. Do you agree with that amendment?
I would, yeah, for sure.
Councillor Craddock as the seconder.
Yes.
Could
Go ahead.
I'd just like to suggest that maybe we do it in two separate resolutions,
Okay.
just to make it cleaner, because that would be direction to staff more around the next step if it comes back unsuccessful, as opposed to the resolution that's required for the grant application.
Sounds good. So let's call the question on the first motion to resubmit. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And now a motion that if we refuse the funding based on the 60,000, that it come back to council for any consideration for other funding support.
Can I ask a question first? Ms. Brooksbank, I'm just thinking about this. When we supply and they say no, do they give us an application to reapply with different parameters?
Not
Like, I'm just-
necessarily.
that
Not
may-
necessarily. And again, it's so hard to say, because when the grant announcement does happen, it really depends who's forming the government at that time. I wish I could provide more certainty. I don't know. Are you sort of getting at?
Well, if they come back and say, no, we didn't get funded because you're at 60,000 childcare, would they, if we went back and said, okay, well, how about we do 40, but we'll cover the remaining 20, would they?
Perhaps what we could do is preempt our application with that statement to say, but my hunch is if we do that,
say
they
do
could
it
come
now.
back and say,
Why aren't you doing it now?
show us the money, show
Yeah.
us the matching. So I can't say for certain if they will do that.
I think that's a really good question. I had the same thought, Ms. Gilmore, and I feel like the approach we're taking is resubmit with the 60,000, try to hammer home the message that this is the cost of doing business here. And through those conversations, hopefully I get those conversations with ministry and ministers that, maybe we get to that point where I could then consider, within those conversations, consider the option that Councillor Craddock's proposing and bring it back to council. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like let's go ahead and keep conveying the message that 40,000 is not feasible. 60 is realistic and it's bare bones. And that we remain nimble through that conversation. Does that make sense?
I would probably recommend that you not pass another resolution at this point to fund. I mean, if they're going to look and they say, oh, look, Village Pemberton's going to backstop with some money if they don't get their funds.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be something that we make note of from a staff perspective to bring that back to council and action that if that's the direction it can take.
Good point. Yeah. So is council good with leaving it with the resubmission, and we'll update as we go through the process?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I believe Mr. Shima is joining us now.
Yeah, he's just connecting.
Next up, we're on to the electrical vehicle charging stations. This is a joint grant application with the RMOW. Is that Tom or you, Mr. Gilmore?
Hello,
Mr. Shima will take us off.
Mr. Shima, welcome.
can you hear me?
We sure can.
Oh, he's gone.
Can't see you anymore, though.
I've lost all sound for you guys. Sorry, I can't hear anyone. I had it until I joined as a participant. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Sorry, I can't hear any of you, but I'll start by just explaining why I'm here tonight. We were contacted by the Resort Municipality of Whistler regarding Sea to Sky EV network expansion. That's electric vehicle network expansion, a project that they've spearheaded, and they're hoping to have support from neighboring communities. Essentially, it's a Clean BC Community Fund application that they'll be putting in to upgrade and expand the electric vehicle charging network throughout the region. It's a 4-year program that they're hoping to have funding over the course of 4 years, which would see the installation of 24 dual port level 2 chargers. So that's 48 chargers, level 2, which are the slow chargers, and 15 level 3 chargers. Those are the fast chargers. So this is a funding application that Whistler is undertaking, and they've basically just asked if the Village of Pemberton would be willing to partner with them on this program. They've already got support and confirmation from the District of Squamish, and Lilwat Nation, I think, is pending council approval. And yeah, basically it would allow us to partner with them and request some charging units. Initially, in conversations, it's totally up to us how many we'd like to add to that application, but this funding application covers 73.3%, and then it would have to be backed by the municipalities, the rest of the 26.7%. So as council is aware, we have already applied for some charging stations through different grants, but the thought being here was there is an opportunity to have future funds available towards other charging stations. And just from an operations standpoint, I did consider, given the direction that we're hoping to go at the recreation site, that it might be a suitable location for level 2 chargers, which are the much cheaper option. Generally, the level 2 chargers go for just under $20,000. So at 73%, the village would have to only fund 4,800, I think was the total amount. These are on initial cost estimates, but yeah, basically, I just wanted to see if council supported this initiative and if we could go forward with the support. And see if there was any appetite for applying for this. The benefit of this fund is that it would be over the course of 4 years, so we wouldn't necessarily need to commit to the funding right now, but we would need to express our interest in joining their application, and we would have to specify how many chargers we may be interested in. So initially, I thought somewhere between 2 and 4 level 2 chargers, which are the slow charging units that would require a contribution of approximately, so if we were to get 2 dual ports, which is 4 charging units, that the total cost would be around 68,000, which 49,000 would be covered by this grant, and the village would have to contribute the remaining 18,000. That's based on initial estimates, but that would be sort of the neighborhood that we're talking. So we wouldn't need to necessarily pass a resolution now to provide that funding, but they do want an initial commitment that we are interested, and we could access that funding anywhere between now and 2024. So there would be time to implement this. Now, sorry, I still don't think I'm getting any sound from anyone. But I think if anyone has any questions, I'm not sure if Ellie's able to reboot me here to see if I'm getting any sound. But
I'm gonna
right now, I can't hear your questions. I'm sorry.
I'll try returning you to attendee.
And maybe Ms. Gilmore.
And then unmuting.
One thing that I just wanted to mention is that they will be requiring an official council resolution in order to make the application. Really what this is now and why it's coming in a verbal report is just to understand if council has the desire to undertake this initiative. So because they're in their planning process, and so they need to identify how many chargers they need to include in order to do the cost estimate in order to bring forward a grant application. So before we committed, we wanted to have the conversation with council and see if this is something you'd like us to pursue in partnership with RMLW and District of Squamish and potentially Lilwat.
So a couple quick questions on that. Mr. Shima said that we could potentially pay, so I forget his last number. I think he said it was about $8,000.
Well, the total of 18,000 for all 4. But it'd be about 4,800.
I can now hear you all, by the way. Sorry. So I think Ellie got me sorted. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt there, Nikki.
Okay.
Yeah. So each charger would say roughly $5,000 per level 2 charger would be the contribution from the village. That's an overestimate.
And you indicated 2 potentially at the rec site, and where were the other 2 earmarked for?
Well, that would be totally up to us. what I had said was actually 2 dual ports, which is 4 chargers total. So if we had 2 dual port chargers at the recreation site, that would be 4 chargers total. I did mention possibly something like at the barn. I know that was another area that we had indicated before. Initial site visit from the electrical engineer said that the cost would likely be a lot higher there due to the availability of power. And that was why we didn't choose that location for our other grant application. But the nice thing about this is that Whistler is paying the consultants to assess all of the locations. And so if we said, okay, we want 4 chargers or 2 dual ports, we could decide where we want them at a later date. So we could say, as long as, assuming that there's not higher costs due to, as I mentioned, certain location parameters, but the recreation site, for example, would be pretty much just the cost of the chargers because we haven't developed that yet. So we could easily include that in the amenity building plans when we design that, just to put an electrical stub out so that it would be an easy connection and a 40 amp breaker in the cabin. And that would be pretty straightforward. So in terms.
Go ahead.
I think wait, but he's having technical difficulties.
Ms. Gilman, maybe we could answer this, and we feel we could pay our contribution over 4 years?
Well, it depends. We would need to pay once we received. So say we wanted to say we're going to do.
In terms of undeveloped areas, we could bring that up now with them.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Now we can, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're back. Sorry, I don't know when I cut out. Where was I? Sorry, I
think we got the gist of it.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
the question from Mayor Richmond was that when we would be required, if we could pay this over the next 4 years. And I was saying, I think it is basically when we receive the infrastructure that would be required to pay. But correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. That would be, yeah, that's correct. We would have to pay for when and they actually haven't even worked out the partnership agreement. There's potential.
Oh, I can't wait to have live meetings again. Did I mention that?
They're just starting with seeking. Are you still not hearing me?
Yeah,
No,
you're
no,
cut
you're
out.
good.
You're good now.
Okay. Yes, to answer your question, the funding would be allocated at the time of installation. So if we chose to put in a charger in 2014, we wouldn't have to fund it until then.
In 2024.
And my last
Hopefully
question,
not.
and sorry for, I'll open it up here, but my last question is, you're saying right now they're looking for a letter of support and how many chargers. Does that still give us the opportunity to consider this at budget time? I mean, I'm generally in support of the idea, definitely. I just want to make sure that it fits within our budget scheme.
But I think they're just looking for confirmation that we don't have the partnership agreement, which would be something that we would need to develop after. It's really just an expression of interest if we are interested, yes or no. And then they can include those numbers in the grant application. I think what we would need to do is put it in the 5-year financial plan and earmark it and identify when we feel that we would want to put that infrastructure in.
Okay.
Now, the grant application is due in November. So they would need a firm commitment on, whether or not we wanted the chargers. But we would need to pass another council resolution at a later date before November, before they apply for the funding that says we're committed to that funding. So I don't think it would be able to make it to the budget sessions, but yeah.
Okay. I'll open it up to council questions and comments. Councillor Noble.
I think it sounds like a good opportunity, and it gives us a lot of breathing space for working it in the budget. I'm not sure if that would be the best location for slow chargers though, because people will be there for sports for the day or for part of a day. A lot of people like to charge while they're at home. So that's my only other thought, is maybe a more dense area, like maybe by the community barn might be a more suitable location.
Thank you.
would you like us to make some, just respond potentially?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chima may be able to say, but I think that it was, I mean, obviously we don't want people to park there for an extended period of time, and there would be a charge associated with that. And so if it was an hour or two, maybe a little bit more, that would probably be enough to get them a charge to get to another location. Hypothetically, people are coming from an already charged area, or they've charged overnight. So that's why we need to look at different varieties, and that's why we applied for the fast charger. That would be on Astor Street beside Pioneer Park. And then the downtown community barn was determined to be too expensive because it doesn't have three-phase power, and that's what's needed at the barn. So that's one of the reasons we actually didn't do it, because it doesn't have three-phase power at that location. So, so just so everyone's aware, when we think about the park and ride, which I do believe we're considering later, we've included 2 or 4 chargers there as well. And we have 2 at the community center, and we're gonna have the fast charger downtown, but the only place we don't currently have any is out at the rec site. And we will be having some field play. So that was one of the areas we identified as a future need for chargers. That was just, that was the rationale.
Okay, thank you for that.
Got it? Go ahead, Councilor Craddock.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll move a motion that we join in with a joint grant application with the Resort Municipality of Whistler for electric vehicle charging stations for the 4 that Mr. Seaman brought forward.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Chima. Oh, no, you're still on with us, aren't you? No, he's gone. We're on to the Rural and Northern Communities Fund application, multimodal transportation hub. Ms. Brooksbank.
Thank you. Excuse me. So the purpose of this report is to seek support for a funding application to the Rural and Northern Communities Fund for the development of a regional multimodal transportation hub on Lot 13. As Council may recall, in January 2019, the village did apply for a park and ride on Lot 13 to this same program, the Rural and Northern Communities Fund. However, unfortunately, we were not successful in that funding application. Following that, staff did speak to the ministry staff to get some feedback on our application to determine how we might change it for a more favorable outcome for a future intake. We actually received really great feedback on the application. They said it scored quite highly, and they didn't really have, they couldn't give us a reason why it wasn't successful. Simply, it was just there was limited funds, and we just didn't make it to the top of the pile. They did make some suggestions on how we might consider improving the application to have a more favorable outcome. And so they had suggested that we consider adding a small change room, washroom facility, perhaps renaming the project to be more inclusive of like multimodal transportation rather than just serving as a park and ride. And then as well as adding some covered bike storage. So in summary, the project that we're putting forward for this funding application is essentially the same. You'll see in the diagram that the layout of the land is more or less the same, except it'll include basically the covered bike storage, irrigation, and yeah, I think that was all the same. Covered bike storage, irrigation, and I think that's it. So the limit of funding that we can apply for this time is actually 10% of the overall pot of money. So there's $58.7 million available. And so basically what they're suggesting is the average grant amount that people should keep in mind when applying is $2.07 million. And so therefore this project as it stands right now with the Class C estimate is 1.6 million. So we do fall within the parameters or the recommended funding parameters of the program. The other thing too, if you recall from the original intake of the Rural and Northern Communities Program, is it does cover up to 100% of the project cost. So there are no matching funds required. So therefore, staff are recommending that council support an application to the Rural Northern Development Infrastructure Program for the development of a multimodal transportation hub for up to $1.6 million.
Brooksbank. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any motions? Would you like to move the recommendation? Councillor Craddock,
Move it.
second by Councillor Noble. Further discussion? I feel like that we're on this one. We got this one. Feel confident. Call the question, all in favor? Oh, go ahead, Ms. Brooksbank. You got a comment?
Sorry, no, I was crossing my fingers.
Okay. All in favor? You can't vote. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Brooksbank. Have a good night.
Before I have another verbal update, but it's just not on here.
Okay.
I could jump in with one other item. I just wanted to bring council's attention to another pot of funding that's been announced. I did mention it in the past. It's sort of the COVID grant funding, which is called Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program, or CERIP, I guess is how they're calling it, all combined. So we have two projects that we're looking to apply for. They're both due October 29th. So we would be bringing forward reports to council on October 20th to seek official resolutions, but I just wanted to flag them with you. One is the Permanent Farm Road East grant that we were not successful for through the Bike BC program. And so these are 100% funding as well. So we're going to increase that a little bit. The last time we applied, it was about 306. But we did not include the crosswalk flashers, so we would probably throw that in. And then there were potentially some lights some little bollard lights to light the trail along there. So looking at approximately maybe a $800,000 grant there. And then potentially reapplying for the Porca Bike Skills Park, only because it's 100% funding. And we could actually add a few other features, such as some lighting and maybe a rain and sun shelter. So those are just two things that we're working on right now to make application for, that I just wanted to bring to your attention.
How would that work with the Bike Skills Park, considering we've already gone
We
to
would say thank you and no thank you if we got the funds on the other grant.
Right. Probably wouldn't that be a good problem to have, hey?
It would be. And we should actually know, I think they want to distribute these funds sooner rather than later, just because of how they came about. So we probably would know earlier on this fund than the other, regardless. So I am also going to update that to the PVIS committee when we meet on Thursday, because I do have a report on the agenda talking about the Bike Skills Park there.
Any questions?
Good news.
Let's do a motion to receive on that. Motion to receive. Councillor Noble, second by Councillor Zant. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Now we're going on to operations. I think Mr. Ward's joining us.
Correct.
Give him a moment.
Yeah, just while he's moving in, I just wanted everyone to know that Friday is his last day for a few months, because his family is going to be having a baby. He personally won't, but his lovely partner will be. So yeah, anyway, this will be his last report presentation for a little while.
Oh,
Well, I hope you take at least 10 days off for paternity.
I'm not going to be back until January.
Yeah.
What? That's crazy talk.
another reason we need daycare right away.
There you go.
I'm going to be chiming in on that very quick.
Thanks for joining us, Mr. Ward. We're on to the Village of Pemberton 2020 Water System Performance Assessment Report. Turn it over to you.
Okay. So yes, hello, Mayor and Council. I'm here to go over my report. I'm actually just going to turn to my PowerPoint presentation here and just start the show. I'm here to go over, oh, sorry, can you all see that?
Nope.
No.
Yep, nope. That's why I have to, sorry, share my screen.
Thinking about 12 years, you'll have a kid who could help you out with your tech problems.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, now I should be able to. Okay, we're all good?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I'm here to go over the Village of Pemberton Water System Performance Assessment. So this is a report that we undertook earlier this year to help identify capital projects that might be required to help support the village's water system and its ability to produce and distribute water that meets all government drinking water regulations. So just jumping straight into it, we have a bit of an overview of our system here, our physical system, just to show the extents. And so you can see here, wells 2 and 3, our drinking water source in the downtown area, feeding up to the reservoirs. Again, I'll touch on all this in a little bit more detail throughout the presentation. The reservoirs feeding through pressure reducing valve stations so that we have a nice consistent pressure range for valley floor. And on this side, we do have the new extension, the Ridge pump station, pumping up to the Ridge Reservoir and feeding the Ridge and Sunstone developments. Our water system also extends out to the wastewater treatment plant. It does not currently connect to the industrial park. The industrial park is connected to the Lillooet water system, and we purchase water from them through a water use agreement. So diving in and taking a little bit of a closer look at our source, this is a graphical description of our aquifer, the Pemberton Creek aquifer that we withdraw water from. So you see the Pemberton Creek is what feeds into the aquifer, which mainly consists of gravel, sands, and cobbles. And the saturated layer is what we withdraw water from. And so we have our 3 wells here in purple, our main drinking water wells. Which a bit of a closer look again here. We have well 1 located in the well house. It's currently isolated from distribution due to extremely high iron and manganese concentrations. It was taken offline, I think, in 2013, 2014. Moving on to well 2. Well 2 is our current backup well. It is located in Faubourg Park. And it was our main drinking water well for the first 5-10 years of its life, and then its water quality also began to decline due to iron and manganese. And at that point, well 3 became our main drinking water well, and it is still our current duty well. And moving on to our system, so we have wells 2 and 3. That currently pump up to the Benchlands reservoirs. The 2 reservoirs up there, they feed directly into the Benchlands pressure zone, which is again, mainly the Benchlands. Through pressure reducing valve stations on Eagle Drive and Fernwood Drive, they reduce pressure to the valley floor, 265 meter pressure zone, which encompasses most of the valley floor. And then we have the new addition at the Ridge pump station, pumping up to the Ridge Reservoir to the Ridge pressure zone, which is exclusive to the Ridge. And we also have a return back into the valley floor pressure system, as well as a little side branch out to Sunstone, which has its own little separate pressure zone. And just want to touch on population growth, because that's what we use to determine when we're likely going to need these improvements to our system. So just looking at this graph here, what I've done is I plotted the last 4 census data points for the village. And I managed to find one data point from 1991 that I threw in here from an old Village of Pemberton water study. And what it shows is that the village has actually grown at a pretty linear rate as far as population growth is. I don't see too much of an exponential growth pattern here. And just using this graph, in 2040, I think we'll be looking at a population of about 4,750, closing in on 5,000. And moving over to our water consumption. So what we have here is our water consumption from 2010 to 2020. And one thing that jumps out here is just the large increase in water that we had from 2010 to 2015. And this was due to a pretty significant water leak that was repaired in 2015. And it was a large enough leak that it impacted our water consumption data here quite significantly, and actually led to a decrease in our aquifer levels at that time. And we did identify and repair that leak. And since then, you could see the data the consumption for the village is actually remarkably consistent, and if anything is actually decreasing to a small extent. You can see the peaks here. And I also just had a peek at our most recent water consumption data up to the end of September, and it also shows the peak for this year is also a little bit smaller than last year. So the decreasing trend in water use is I can't explain it, but it's a good thing to see. Another thing I wanted to point out just on this graph is just the red line here, which is the estimated withdrawal rate of our aquifer. So once our water use bumps up above this red line, that's about when you're probably going to start to see the aquifer decline. And actually that's why this water leak back here, our average water use was actually equal to that line. And that's when we identified that our aquifer was actually depleting at that time. The blue line down below here is actually our current average state demand. So you can see we do have a bit of capacity to build up before this aquifer has reached its capacity. Based on my population projections, that gap would close in approximately 15 to 20 years. Another thing to touch on with water use is the Village of Pemberton's per capita water use is currently around 611 liters per capita per day. The average Canadian municipality is around 427 liters per capita per day. So I think that shows that there is room for improvement for our water consumption, either through water conservation measures, sprinkling restrictions, identifying and repairing leaks, and I think there is room for improvement there. Here is a look at the static water level in our wells 2 and 3. So I think well 3 is in blue there, well 2 is in red. And what you could see here is the peaks represent the winter, the peak of winter. And then as demands increase above 30 liters per second in the summer, you can see our aquifer, the static water level in our well drops. Before it rebounds in the winter when our demands drop below the sustainable withdrawal rate. There are seasonal fluctuations in here as well, but they don't explain the full drop that we're seeing here. So a lot of it is due to our water use. And moving on to the items of interest for myself personally, I have a bit of a chemistry background. The iron levels and the manganese levels in our village wells. So what I've plotted here is, I think some of you may have seen at some point here, there are some additional data points from the last time that just illustrate what we've done since earlier this spring. But what the iron levels show here is that you can see well 3, our current main drinking water well, is it has negligible iron. It's fine for that. Well 2, our backup well, you could see was very similar up until about 2011, when its level spiked. We think likely due to the colonization of iron bacteria, and it spiked to above the threshold here, the aesthetic objective that is set out by the Government of Canada. Basically saying that above that line, you're probably going to have water quality complaints, turbidity, increased maintenance, cleaning of your reservoirs, and so on. These dips here, you'll see well 2 was redeveloped in 2014, and it resulted in a pretty big drop, a little bit below the aesthetic objective, and it did only last maybe 2 to 3 years before rebounding back up again. And we recently redeveloped it again just to try and buy us a bit more time. The results are a little bit inconclusive right now. The iron levels are bouncing around quite a bit, so it's hard to say what the levels actually are at the moment. And then we have our manganese levels. So this one actually has 2 guidelines. One is an aesthetic objective down at the bottom here. And you'll see that wells 1 and 2 are well above the aesthetic objective. And well 3 has recently started increasing in manganese levels and has now exceeded the aesthetic objective. The thing about manganese is, though, there is also a maximum acceptable concentration due to health concerns above that level. And as you can see, well 1 is well above those levels. Well 2 had a gradual increase from 2009 in manganese before slowly peaking, and it had a dip at redevelopment, and it's currently bouncing around. The concerning thing is that with well 3 and well 2 have shown a bit of a similar trend in both basically had negligible iron and manganese before showing a sudden spike first actually in manganese, followed by a spike in iron. So I'm actually thinking we may start seeing iron in well 3 here in the next couple of years. But certainly the concerning trend here is well 2 exceeding the maximum acceptable concentration, and well 3 looking like it might be following a similar early trend at the least.
Mr. Ward, can I interrupt for a second? Yep. Do you have any understanding or explanation for the spikes and the fluctuations in the iron? I mean, obviously after redevelopment, things lower, but the numbers just seem so hard to follow. Like they spike and they fluctuate and they move all around. Do you have any understanding of, like, is it a seasonal thing? Is it?
That is something that we're trying to identify with the increased testing. So right now you'll see that those data points before this year were all annual data points. So just once a year testing. We're doing monthly testing now, and we are seeing that the levels do jump a lot. So it's hard to identify whether, you know, the curve that we see from 2010 to 2018, exactly how representative it is, because you could see the levels actually vary quite a bit throughout the year. So it really depends kind of on what time of year you took the sample possibly. But that's one of the reasons why we're increasing testing, just so we could get an idea of what's actually happening at a finer level rather than just once a year. But as far as explaining the source, it's really hard to say, because it's it's 130 feet below the ground. It's really hard to explain or think of what could be causing these fluctuations.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Yep. Just moving on to conclusions. So the first conclusion here that I reached with the report is just that if current trends continue, it looks like the village will require treatment targeting manganese within the next 4 to 6 years. Again, that depends on how the manganese levels trend, how the manganese levels in well 3 trend. The village will likely require an additional source within the next 10 to 15 years, depending on development and, again, population growth. Whether that's a completely new source or a supplemental source, that's something we'll have to determine. There is room for improving per capita water use and extending the life of the aquifer. So if we could really lower our consumption to be more in line with the Canadian average, I think we could extend the life of that aquifer for a noticeable and a significant amount of time. That would make it worthwhile. And I have each conclusion twice, so I'm just going to move on to my recommendations for the system. So the first one, and some of these recommendations we've already implemented, they still stand. I still want to keep them going. One is increasing the frequency of water quality testing for iron, manganese, and iron bacteria for wells 2 and 3, annually to monthly. So I already touched on that with you, Mike. One of the reasons is we want to see how it does fluctuate through the seasons, through the year, and what we're actually experiencing, rather than just snapshots once a year. Perform redevelopments of wells 2 and 3 to potentially improve water quality and well efficiency in the short term. So we've actually already redeveloped well 2. The results from that are a bit mixed. As I mentioned, the iron and the manganese seem to be bouncing around a little bit after redevelopment. So it's hard to decide or hard to determine what effect has actually been had yet. Wells 3 we have scheduled to actually be redeveloped. We're trying to schedule it here for the end of the month, now that our water consumption has lowered. Third recommendation is to initiate a study for the treatment of iron and manganese in wells 2 and 3, comparing various treatment options along with their estimated capital and operation and maintenance costs. And I'd also like to add location in there as well, because location is going to play a pretty big part in there. Recommendation number 4, undertake a water source feasibility study to determine the most feasible option in developing a new source to replement or supplement the existing source. And the study could focus on both groundwater and surface water options, and should include capital and operating costs. Recommendation number 5 is to investigate methods of reducing water consumption, such as water conservation methods, leak detection, implementation, if we could, of water efficient appliances, anything we can do to bring down the village's per capita water demands and decrease the demands on our aquifer. And lastly, this one has already been initiated. So it's initiate the design and installation of a backup generator for wells 2 and 3, just to ensure that the village is able to provide water in a situation that involves loss of power for a significant amount of time. So I know we're in the design process of that, and I hope we have that constructed by next summer. And I believe that's the end of my presentation, so I open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ward. That's a great report, very clear. I got a couple quick questions, and then I'll turn it over, and then I'll ask my other questions after. How do you feel about our ability to detect leaks at this point? You know, that leak detection was obviously significant for us a few years back. There might be smaller ones. How do you feel our ability to detect leaks is at this point?
I know that we do have some of the infrastructure to determine leaks. So we haven't utilized it all that much yet, which were the water metering and leak detection project, I believe, in 2013. Other than that, it's actually quite difficult.
Am I frozen or is he frozen?
He's frozen.
No.
Hello?
Yeah, you're
There
back.
you are.
Sorry.
You ended with ability to detect leaks.
Yes, the difficulty in detecting leaks is actually a lot of the time it just comes down to when they show up, such as that leak from 2015. That leak was actually about a toonie-sized leak in one of our water mains, right near Gateway, right near the in front of Petro. So it was a very significant leak that we weren't able to find until the ground started bubbling. But we do have some of the equipment to do this, and it's something that I want to utilize a bit more. So that's something that we could certainly work on.
Can you maybe just speak to? It sounds like in one of your recommendations is to understand manganese treatment. Do we have any understanding of what manganese treatment would look like in terms of cost and infrastructure?
It would be a pretty significant cost. Certainly treatment for manganese includes, it's usually a type of filter media filtration. I really don't want to spit numbers out there, but when you're talking of treatment plants of this size, it is in the millions of dollars for sure. But as far as infrastructure, there are considerations where we could put it, because you want it to be able to treat for both wells 2 and 3. You know, our current system, one of the places that I think would make a lot of sense is at the reservoirs, where both wells 2 and 3 are both converging. But the good thing is that treatment for iron and manganese is actually very similar. And when you're targeting iron or manganese, in fact, usually you're targeting both. So it's a very common treatment. I won't say that there's typically off-the-shelf treatment systems for a municipality of our size, but certainly they make it for residential system. It's a pretty common issue.
Thank you. I'll open up for council for discussion and questions. Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dave. And just an excellent report. Really nice to see. Thank you for that. Back in about 2013, we spent some dollars putting in a leak detection system through a lot of our system. Is that not able to be resurrected and put to use?
That is what I was touching on. I'm aware of the project now. That stuff is in place. I'm not that familiar with its use yet, though.
Okay, thank you. And the second question or statement, I guess, is our per capita water use is about 50% higher than the national average. Has that got anything to do with the fact that, oh, do we lose him?
Did we just lose him?
Are you there, Dave?
No, he's gone. Maybe Tom can answer. I got you, Councillor Antonov.
I have a question, maybe Ms. Gilmore can answer. My understanding is we're not supposed to be using the water for agricultural use, and do you have an idea of whether it is or isn't, or how much we're losing to that use?
We don't have a lot of agricultural use. I don't have a number off the top of my head here. I think that one thing that we have been working closely with the regional district on doing is ensuring that they also are not selling, as you know, we supply water to Pemberton North, and there's more agricultural use potentially in that area. And so we've been working with them over the past several years to ensure that a well would be used if there's irrigation for their animals or crops. I don't think it's the majority of the use is attributed to that, but we can definitely crunch some numbers. We would probably have cubic meters, because most of those would be outside boundaries potentially, if there were any. Yeah, but I don't have a number off the top of my head.
Councillor Caddick, do you want to repeat your question to Mr. Ward?
Yeah, I guess my question was basically, because we're at about 50% higher than the national average, has that got something to do with the fact that we're still suggesting to people to run your water for a length of time before we use it? And if that's the case, how can we get out of that?
I don't think running tap water before use would play too much of an impact on water use. I guess what you're trying to get at is why is our water so high? And I think I heard someone talk about agriculture and irrigation, and certainly I think that plays a little bit of a part in it. But I think one thing that we could do to help identify it is, and part of it is using this water meter information that we have, is being able to determine where the water is actually being used. That's part of the leak detection project that went on, that I know was the installation of, I think, 7 water meters throughout town to be able to identify where the high water use areas are, and maybe that'll help us in determining the nature of our water use.
Thank you.
I think that's really important work. I mean, again, we saw the difference in that one leak detection that you described, maybe smaller ones around town. I feel like, anecdotally, yeah, we have our gardens and our lawns, but no more than most other communities. So it's surprising to me that our usage is that much higher. It's nice to see that it's gone down, but
I'll come down in a minute.
I'm hopeful that our
I was actually just reading a report, an old report, and they mentioned the 2015, our average water consumption was 900 liters per capita per day. So it's certainly gone down, and a lot of that was because of that leak. But certainly we're in the right direction, but we're still a bit high.
Right. Other questions or comments? Councillor Zant.
Thanks, Dave. That was an amazing report. I appreciate that. Thank you. One question I had specifically was when we were talking about treatment for iron and manganese, if we do that treatment, would we be able to treat well 1 and bring it back online?
Certainly that'd be a possibility. Wells 2 and 3, however, they withdraw enough water from the aquifer as is that well 1 withdraws from the same aquifer. So we don't need well 1 basically.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And then I guess my last question would be is when you mentioned building these filtration plants, maybe this is more for Ms. Gilmore, but I'm wondering, is there any grant funding out there for that through the provincial government or the federal government that could help us along with this?
There isn't at this time, but I think that's something we always want to keep our ear to the ground on. The other, obviously, if it's in the millions, it's not really, it's something we would need to probably include to apply for grants, or we'd have to do some type of long-term borrowing. Or another element is, as you may recall, we are redoing our development cost charge bylaw. So that would most likely be a project that we could include in that as far as a 20-year capital plan. And then everyone would sort of contribute to that. But I would say primarily, a gas tax could use the amount we get per year, probably wouldn't help us. But that's definitely something, when we look at these types of reports, then we can determine shelf-ready projects. And that's where I think looking at a design so that we have a shelf-ready project. We've done a few of those already as we've just been applying for grants. But for infrastructure, that's something that we're trying to focus on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Ward, Ms. Gilmore, the redevelopment projects that we're talking about here, is that already included in our water system budget, or is that, are those additional costs?
No, that's included. So we actually didn't, what we had done is we'd combined a few projects and we were going to look for well number 4. As you might recall, we did start pounding a well and it wasn't, didn't have the best capacity or productivity that we were looking for. So at this time, we just used the funds to redevelop our wells so we could continue to have water supply while we continue. If we can redevelop those and make them usable, we wouldn't necessarily need another well in this aquifer. But I think looking at another source is definitely something we should also be exploring as well.
So thanks for that segue. My last comment is one I make every time we talk about the aquifer, which is I'm hopeful that we are continuing to have conversations with Leeward Nation and looking at potentially joint aquifers, how we can approach this together. Maybe we could supply water for all of our communities together, and as well as access funds together to do that. So I'm hoping that it's an ongoing, or it's always on staff's radar to communicate with Leeward on this one and see how we can move ahead together on this one.
I agree.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, Mr. Ward, thank you very much. Can I get a motion to receive the report?
Thanks, David. I'll make the motion.
Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Antonelli. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
On the bylaws, we are on 11B, which is the Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw 832. This is an amendment to the bylaw Child Care Center 889-2020. We got Ms. Reese joining us on this, and Mr. Jean. Ms. Reese, I think you're presenting on this.
Sorry.
There you are. Welcome.
Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to introduce zoning bylaw amendment number 889-2020 for first and second reading and to schedule a public hearing. So recently, Development Services staff received an inquiry about opening a childcare center in the Village of Pemberton within the commercial Portage Road C3 zone. And in reviewing this request, staff discovered that the zoning bylaw doesn't permit privately operated childcare centers in commercial zones. There is a high demand for childcare spaces in Pemberton, as demonstrated by the Childcare Needs Assessment, which was completed in 2019. And so staff have prepared a zoning bylaw amendment to include childcare center as a permitted principal use in all commercial zones, to remove barriers and to help facilitate the development of childcare spaces. So a childcare center is defined as the use of land and buildings for provincially licensed care and supervision of children through a prescribed program. Childcare centers require a license, which is issued by Vancouver Coastal Health, and then they're required to apply for a Village of Pemberton business license. So in 2008, a zoning bylaw amendment was made to add group daycare as a permitted use in the commercial town center C1 zone. And it appears that in translating the information to the new zoning bylaw, that the intent of this amendment was inadvertently lost. Currently, zones C1, C2, C3, and C5 allow civic uses, which includes daycares that are provided by a government body or a service club, but excludes privately operated childcare centers. Staff have reviewed the official community plan together with the zoning bylaw and have determined that the proposed text amendment is consistent with the village's policies. Childcare centers in commercial zones would be in close proximity to housing, day-to-day services, community facilities, and employment opportunities. After the completion of this report to council, staff have received a letter of support from the Pemberton and District Chamber of Commerce. And we've also been notified by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that they have no objection, but the bylaw will require approval from the minister after third reading and prior to adoption. So because the bylaw is consistent with the official community plan through the Local Government Act, council does have the ability to waive the need for a public hearing. However, staff don't recommend this action. Hosting a public hearing will maximize transparency and allow impacted citizens to voice their opinions. And also due to the Local Government Act advertising requirements for waiving a hearing, it won't reduce the processing time of this bylaw. So in conclusion, staff recommends that the Village of Pemberton zoning bylaw amendment, Child Care Center bylaw number 889/2020 receive first and second reading, and that council directs staff to convene a public hearing on Tuesday, October 20th, 2020 at 9 a.m. via electronic means. Staff also suggests consideration of third reading following the public hearing at the regular meeting of council. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any additional questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. One quick question through your staff's consideration of this. Is there any concern about childcare space conflicting with other uses? In other words, residential, business, whatever, in terms of these zoning? Is there any concern around that sort of conflict? Go ahead, Mr. Genie.
Given that civic uses are already a permitted use in all of the commercial zones, and so therefore a government run or service club run daycare could already go ahead and be permitted, we don't foresee that the land use conflicts of it being a privately run daycare would be a problem.
Council questions and comments?
I'll move recommendation.
Noble.
I think it's a good idea to remove any further barriers to daycare. We kind of need all the opportunities we can get.
Okay. Would you like to make the motion as
I
recommended?
would. I'll make the motion.
Councillor Noble, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Further discussion? Councillor Antonelli. Oh, that was a vote of support.
Yes, that was a vote of support.
Okay. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Reese. Thank you, Ms. Virginie.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
June.
Thank you.
I'll move recommendation number 2.
Oh, oh, yeah, we only did the first one. You're right. Good call. Moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Zant. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're getting there. We're on to the mayor's report. The first item on that is the Diamond Rally. So I'm not going to report on that. I think it's open for discussion. I will open it up to council. Would somebody like to comment on this first? We received it. So we received the one correspondence from a Sea to Sky resident expressing concerns around the Diamond Rally and the hazards that might come with it. We've also received other correspondence. So yeah, this is for conversation. Our role in this in the past as the Village of Pemberton has been to rent our airport space for the Diamond Rally to complete its rally. And there's been charities that have been beneficiaries from this, and that's sort of been our role in it. So we're being asked to reconsider this. So again, I will put it out to council for discussion. Councillor Noble.
In light of the information we've received that the rally car driver was not at fault in the accident, I don't see any reason to hold it against them that there was an accident. I don't think that should have any bearing on the rally. they do a lot for charity with that rally.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Councillor Antonelli?
Yeah, I don't think it's that important that we parse out who is at fault in one particular accident. It's nice. Well, I guess it is a bit reassuring to know that it wasn't a rally participant that was the cause of the accident. But it wasn't the first time that I've heard of sort of erratic driving and whatnot on the Sea to Sky Highway associated with that rally. So, you know, we don't have full information on that and it's hearsay. So what I would say we do with that is just make sure when the permitting comes around to allow the event to take place on the airport, that it come to council for consideration and that we have RCMP input. I heard some discussion about why is it on the Labor Day weekend, you know, a very busy weekend, perhaps just to reduce the chances of accident, we'd be better off having it on that busy weekend. So I think it would be good to just have some professional input on that before the Village of Pemberton considers it again.
Thank you. Ms. Fraser?
If I could clarify, the Diamond Rally is usually held at the very beginning of May, but because of COVID, they moved it and had hoped to run it in July. And then with COVID continuing to be a concern, they tentatively scheduled the September 5th date, subject to them being able to meet the COVID requirements that were set out by Vancouver Coastal Health. So they did a lot of work with Vancouver Coastal Health to meet those requirements and were able to run the rally. But normally this rally is held the first weekend in May. So quite early in the spring season and before, and not generally on a long weekend at all. It was just a matter of a date that they could make it work for this year, given the pandemic situation. So just to clarify that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Right. They do work quite extensively with the RCMP and the police, all the way from the City of Vancouver right through to here. So Sea to Sky Highway Services are well aware of the event taking place and have a lot of conversations with RCMP in advance of the event even leaving Vancouver and in the lead up to the planning for it. So again, just let you know the RCMP are very much aware that these events are taking place, and I think they even have a police escort in certain sections as well. So,
thank you. Personally, I think that, you know, whenever we're looking at stuff like this, we have to look at it as a whole. We look at the number of motorcycle accidents there were on Highway 99 this summer. Do we restrict motorcycle traffic? Not necessarily. On the other hand, we also talk about all the pressures on our highway. So do we encourage car rallies on our highway, especially on Labor Day, which, as Ms. Fraser just clarified, it's not necessarily the case, but are we encouraging more traffic on an already, you know, overly stressed road? So I think they're all really good questions, and I support Councillor Antonelli's, you know, suggestion that when the permitting comes up, we have a look at it and just make sure that we feel comfortable with what we're supporting is in line with safety and some of the pressures on our highway. But I think it's also hard to isolate one thing over another. You know, how many cars were there in the rally compared to the thousands of cars that are on that highway every day? Is it exacerbating? Is it contributing to the problem? Perhaps. So I think it's an interesting conversation. As Councillor Noble said, you know, it's nice to know, or you know, it's helpful to know that the accident wasn't caused by the rally, so to speak. And I think I think they both make good points. I think, as Councillor Antonelli said, as we consider these permitting and these activities going down the road, let's just look at our highway and the pressures and the safety factors. But I think it's a it's a much more complex situation. Again, we've seen more motorcycle traffic on our highway than we've ever seen before over the last 4 or 5 months. We've seen more local lower mainland traffic on the road. There's been a ton of pressures on the highway. So how we work towards that from transit to events, I think we have to look at the whole picture. Ms. Gilmore.
So when we receive an application, it's for use of our airport for a park. So, I mean, I think that would be what you're looking for is something that we don't collect the data on. I think initially their destination is Whistler, and it was expanded over the past several years to then come up to the airport. So I think there needs to be either, if there's another permitting process that we need to determine, because there's no way we would be able to go, well, how many cars are on average day on the highway and how many are you going to be having? I don't know if that's something that is useful to us. I would rather consider not holding it if we're having to do a bunch of analytics to see if they're going to use our airport.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Antonelli, I don't think the expectation is that staff do a bunch of analytics on it. I think it's a similar conversation to one we had with regards to Ironman and other events that come through, our festival. When we look at an event and go, okay, well, this is what they're asking from us. How does it contribute to the community? How does it contribute to challenges in the community? That sort of thing. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Antonelli, I don't think the idea is that staff come back with those sorts of counts. I think it's just something that we consider when we look at these events as a whole, which is, again, tough to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more what I was speaking to was that we make sure that the opinions and information that the RCMP has that, inform their involvement with this comes to council, that we can consider that as well, so that, we can make an informed decision.
Okay, I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not objecting to this at all. So we have a park use permit and we have a special event permit. And both of those authorities have been delegated to staff to, once the parameters have been set, then we're good to issue the permit. So if there's a need to change that, then we would need to go and review and see how that needs to be brought forward for these types of events. But the current status on how that works is not what is being suggested here. Again, I'm not saying I'm not opposed to it, but we would need to go back and say, maybe for events of this type or nature, we would follow this process and take it out of the formal process that we have.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe in this case, and tell me if I'm going the wrong way, it's a matter of with this particular event or when it comes to car rallies on the highway, that they come back to council for consideration. Is that maybe where we want to go with this?
Good. I mean, let us take a look and see what we would suggest. We won't spend a lot of time on it. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Whether or not we just want to pass a resolution of council to say that anything dealing with car rallies will be, again, I'm not sure what's in those policies or bylaws. So potentially Ms. Fraser has something to add to that effect.
I want to be careful. Like, again, there's a lot of users on our highway, and who are we targeting? Why is one better than the other? Why is it okay to ride your motorcycle all up and down the highway but not your Lamborghini in a group? You can be groups of motorcyclists, but so I just want to be careful that we're being fair on this here. That's all. Ms. Fraser, and then I'll go to Councillor Noble.
The way the bylaws are written, we would actually have to amend the bylaw to change how our process, our review process handles. So that would mean preparing bylaw amendment and bringing it back. But maybe council would consider that we ask the applicant to make a presentation to council, just providing them an overview of their event, who they are, how they're going to run the event, and so that council has an opportunity to ask questions and also get to know the organizers of these types of events. I mean, we really only have two. They're organized by the same group, and they've been doing it for years. So they're pretty dialed, and they would be, I'm sure, happy to come to council in advance of their events and just speak to you and respond to any concerns that you have. So that might be a way to do it, as opposed to changing, bringing forward bylaw amendments and that kind of thing.
Councillor Zant.
I would agree with Ms. Fraser's opinion there. I'd prefer, in this case, to have the Diamond Valley organizers come to council, and then we can ask them their questions, as opposed to changing bylaws and whatnot.
Sorry, Councillor Noble, I skipped over you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we need to be really mindful not to pick unfairly on this one demographic of vehicles, which are only on the road one weekend in any significance. And by definition of the vehicles, they're really not holding up traffic or congesting it that much more. They tend to go through fairly quickly. And also, I think that there's a lot of public that don't like them. But we also have to be mindful of whether that's their personal prejudice, because some people just don't like seeing really loud, obnoxiously rich looking vehicles everywhere. Just like our road bikers get picked on quite often very unfairly. So we want to be mindful not to do that.
I think that's a good point. I think it's also important to remember, my own personal politics, my own personal opinions, burning two-stroke and burning gas for fun is something that I struggle with in climate change. Whether it's ripping around on a snowmobile up and down a hill, I don't do that, and I don't want to. I'm opening myself up to a lot of criticism here. It's not where I go. I don't dirt bike or snowmobile, that sort of thing. That's my own decision. Others do, and that's fine. But we are, I think one of the considerations is, as we support events, do they align with our climate and our environmental goals? I think that's a consideration. I think that could all be considered, as Councillor Antonelli said, if this comes back to us as these permits are being provided. So I don't know if we have to debate all that right now, but I think there's more. There's safety, there's congestion on our highway, there's fairness. Again, as Councillor Noble said, there's all kinds of users on our highway. Well, let's be fair about what we're trying to do here. There's climate change. So I think there's a lot to consider on all of these, and we have to be careful. Councillor Noble.
I actually agree with you on the burning two-stroke for entertainment, the noise and all that. However, even looking at that, you have to look at the fact these guys are going on the road to a track and containing it there. They're not up in our alpine and all over the mountains and in places they shouldn't be. So
I hear you. There's other I'm going to try to phrase this carefully. There's other environmental things going on out in our backcountry and on our roads that we have to consider as a whole, but here's one that we can look at. So I think, again, Councillor Antonelli's direction of saying, hey, can we look at this as these permitting comes forward and maybe look at it as a big picture might be the way to go. I don't know if that's a problem for our process with staff. If so, we could look at amending that, but I think we could spend all night debating, whether it's okay to run your boat, your skidoo, your dirt bike, and what's better. And I've got a 1-ton truck, so you can call me out too, right? So we can have that debate all night long. But I think maybe in this case it's a matter of as this event comes up for permitting, making sure that the RCMP feel that it's being safely run and that we feel that it aligns with our directions. So along those lines, are we looking for a motion to have these sorts of permitting come back to staff as opposed to being delegated? Is that where we want to go?
That would mean bringing all permits of any type back, park use and special events permits. And so when you consider that, I think Ms. Olson issued probably 13 or 14 permits, each one of those would have to come to council.
Right.
And then that would hold up some of these events. We don't get the applications until sort of 10 days before the event happens. So it would be a major change to our process.
Got Councillor Antonelli and Councillor Craddock.
I don't think that we need to amend our bylaws for council to have a discussion about this when the next application comes forward. I think we could just bring the information to council and have a discussion, and then staff can carry on with the process.
Would council not feel the need to actually see the event organizers come so that you could have direct conversation, or is there, you feel there's more benefit in reviewing their permit, which rather than have them come present directly?
And on that note, the permit wouldn't talk about any other portion of their event other than that is held within the Village of Pemberton and on the facility.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to hear from the event organizers, and we also have the RCMP come up and talk to us periodically. I think we could discuss it with them when we meet with them.
Councillor Craddock?
Yeah, I think a couple of the points were raised. I don't think we need to create any more work for staff by doing this. I don't think we need to change the bylaws. If we have the organizers come up and talk to council and the RCMP are working with them, that's enough. There's lots of rallies that go through the town, if not weekly, certainly monthly. I'm not going to get into a situation where everybody's got to start talking to us whether they stop here or not. So I think it's time to move on with this discussion.
Okay. So I'm not hearing any motion coming out of this. Sorry, it's getting dark.
Do we need a motion to just have further discussion about this when the next application comes?
Well, what I'm hearing from staff is that if we're asking to have a discussion around this event, we're asking staff to bring every event forward. Is that the case?
Is this, well, it depends, I guess. Are you looking for events specific to the airport? Are you looking for over a certain number of vehicles impacted? I mean,
the idea is that with this event, the goal is to have a presentation to council to lay out safety and other items and maybe connect with the RCMP. So I don't know if that's requires a resolution or not, but Ms. Fraser.
Well, one option might be to just have a resolution that the event organizers be invited to make a presentation to council in advance of their event.
I'll make that motion.
I have a seconder for discussion. Councillor Zant, further discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. The rest of my mayor's report. I'm going to do it quicker because it's getting dark in my office here. I do have a number of meetings I want to report on. Some of the we've kind of gone through over the course of the day. I had SLRD meetings a couple weeks ago. Really quickly hitting the tops of the waves. There was a discussion about climate action, and there was an allocation in last year's budget for a climate action officer. And that's not the right term, but a staff member that can sort of put forward some of the climate action actions that are coming through the board. That position was put on hold until the new CAO was hired, which she's been in place now for about a month. So that's going to get put into place. The Investing in Canada Infrastructure Grant Fund, just for your interest, I mentioned this, but a couple of them that have come forward. One is for increased internet connectivity up in the northern part of the region. And the other is staff is working with the Lillooet Agriculture and Food Society on a grant application for a Lillooet food and hub and cold storage facility, which is pretty cool. It's something along the lines of what we're looking at through our economic development. So interesting to watch that one. I've spoken before about the Jack Webster Bridge replacement. That bridge is getting rebuilt. It's on hold till 2021. That's on the Upper Squamish Road, Upper Squamish Valley Road. We had a delegation from Shaw. They just talked about their project, or not just, but talked about the project of bringing fiber from Whistler all the way up to Cache Creek. I don't have to go into detail. I feel like you guys know most of the details on this. They're partnering with Bell. Shaw is doing one segment to Lillooet. I believe Bell is doing the segment from Lillooet to Cache Creek. What it means for us is here in our Pemberton Valley is that we now have a competitive market, something that we worked hard on, staff and council, and we worked hard working with TELUS and Shaw to bring fiber in with both these companies. And now we've got both, and we have a competitive market where our residents can actually choose the best package and the best price. So we went from 0 capacity 2 years ago, and I just want to remind us, because we don't often celebrate our successes, but a couple of years ago we had 0 capacity. You built a new house, you couldn't get internet. We went from that to 2 companies bringing in fiber and a competitive market. So I think it's pretty exciting. Quick note on FireSmart funding from the regional district aspect. They've opened the funding up. So whereas it used to be $50,000 for a regional district, now each area in the regional district can apply for $50,000 of funding for FireSmarting. So right now, regional district staff is putting together an application for $150,000 for 3 of the areas to do some FireSmarting. So that could be good news. And it was just a quick segue. I mean, on the Wednesday, Thursday, I was sort of in and out of these meetings because I was on ministers' meetings, which I'll get to in a moment, but I did miss a couple segments. Sorry, I had to close the door. On the Thursday, we had our committee of the whole, and the bulk of that meeting was based around the Fine Peace development. And for your reminder, the Fine Peace development is the Furry Creek development. And this is a significant, there's a number of significant developments down in that area that we've talked about before. The Fine Peace one is the Furry Creek area, and they have had the ability to do up to 920 units over the hillside and down to the waterfront. I reported on this, but it was quite a while ago. About a year ago, I'm going to say, they came back with a revision of their proposal, and that was to limit some of the development on the hillside and concentrate some of their unit development on the waterfront. So one of the significant changes that they brought forward is to increase the density down on the waterfront. They're looking for 4, 5, 6-story buildings along the waterfront and concentrating the density down there and less on the hillside. So about a year ago when this came forward, the board sent them back with a number of concerns that we've talked about, other developments from everything from along there, flood protection and the rise of the sea levels, transit, and a whole other number of things that I'll cover really quickly. And we sent them back and said, you know, give us some information on this, bring that forward, and then we'll consider looking at having staff develop a bylaw with you, because it does require some rezoning down low. So some of the concerns or some of the issues that were brought forward from the board that they wanted the developers to consider were the step code, bringing it to step 3 or the highest current code of development or building, and being net zero by 2032, accommodating transit in a meaningful way, the pier and the park trails network being publicly accessible, flood protection, as I mentioned, the rise of the sea level, what the diking is going to look like, and reviewing the FCL, the flood construction level, water supply master plan. So these and a couple other items were some of the items that the board said, look, come back with some detail, some level of detail on this, and we will start talking about developing a bylaw for rezoning. So they did come back with some accommodations for a number of these items. One of the biggest ones that's been brought forward has been firefighting. You know, they're proposing 4, 5, 6-story buildings down there by the water. The concept was that they would have a volunteer or semi-volunteer firefighting department similar to our own. And there's a lot of concern around that. First of all, this is a community that does have some commercial. It's got 15,000 square feet of commercial allocation, but for the most part, the people living in this community will be working outside the community. So as we know, here in our town where we have volunteer firefighters who step up in an awesome way, it's still difficult to find and have enough people to respond. And most of our firefighters work here within the community. There's a concern that the cost of and the availability of firefighters to manage multi-complex and 4, 5, 6-story buildings in the Fine Peace development is not feasible. So there's a real push from the board to get a better understanding of how they plan to provide fire protection. It's a huge part of moving forward on this development. And again, things like transit, affordable housing, how many covenanted units, non-market units are they going to offer within this redevelopment? So all these items were brought forward. The board felt that there was substantial work done on them, enough to move ahead and have staff work with the developers on a bylaw for have staff work on a bylaw for consideration and to work with the developers on some of these issues to flesh them out. But the board felt that there was enough there and enough work done to continue down the process. But having said that, there's still a lot to work out. Again, the firefighting one is a big one, making sure that this proposal of multi-story buildings fits the natural landscape, is a big one as well. Access to the waterfront is a big one, transit. So these things will continue to be fleshed out, but at this point, the board has said to staff, go ahead and start developing a bylaw for consideration. That was the bulk of our committee of the whole meeting. I also attended a Sea to Sky Regional Hospital District meeting, and this was actually one of our longer hospital district meetings. We were working on talking about our reserves and our budget coming forward. The hospital district board has been very strong for the last couple of years on trying to build up reserves. Two things: build up reserves, and how do we, through those reserves, through the taxation, fund healthcare needs that our residents feel are most important to them. As I mentioned before, every year we get big requests from VCH to help fund this or that improvement. And we've often felt that we're just sort of we're taking the taxation and handing it over to VCH going, okay, go ahead and do your work. Whereas a lot of that work should come through the funding from the province originally anyway, not from our regional taxation. So we've struggled with that a lot. We've struggled with, the board has struggled with trying to build up those reserves so that we can support some of these local healthcare initiatives. And the reserve conversation has been going on for a little while. What's interesting is it's come to a bit of a culmination now in the middle of a pandemic. Again, the overall feeling from the board is to increase those reserves in a substantial way, recognizing the pandemic and other issues are going to increase healthcare needs. We're going to have more pressures on our healthcare system up and down the corridor. It's even more important, despite financial difficulties right now, to build up those reserves. So a few options were brought forward to build up those reserves over a couple of years. And to put it very simplistically, there was 3 options proposed, from a more conservative to a more aggressive approach to building up those reserves. The more aggressive obviously results in a higher taxation rate. It was quite a long debate amongst us. In the end, the board voted for the most aggressive taxation rate to build up those increases to support healthcare. And again, I very, very much support that intention. I did, however, vote against the motion. At this point, and a couple other board members felt that with economic uncertainties, with other increases to taxation that are looming, we should wait to do that. And again, I very much agree with the intention to increase those reserves. There will be more healthcare needs that we need to pay for, but I was not quite on board with the most aggressive route. Nonetheless, The vote was for that option. It's basically increasing the reserves 15% over 2020 and another 10% over 2021. There's about a $37 cost per $1 million assessment to households, so it's not insignificant. It does substantially increase that reserve, and that was the decision of the board at the time. I hate to do this, but I've got some noise in the background. Can I just please pause for 2 seconds?
Sheena, are you marking the mayor as absent?
Maybe he's chasing another bear.
I don't know. Are we recessed?
We're not recessed, sorry. I apologize. I had a dog barking. It was very distracting. I'm back. So that was the sort of the funding discussion. And then there was another discussion that followed in terms of how to really identify what the health needs are for our residents up and down the corridor and make sure that those healthcare priorities are being met. What does that public engagement look like? How do we engage our physicians and our care workers to make sure that this is a significant taxation to our residents, and how do we make sure that the dollars are going where we want them to? And we haven't always felt as a board that, you know, just supporting VCH requests is the right way to go. So more to come on that. There's a couple of proposals put forward to how to engage the public and healthcare workers, but there'll be more on that to come. And as part of that, there's a proposal for the Worcester Trauma Center to get a fairly substantial expansion. We've asked them for a little more clarity in terms of what that looks like and whether that's something we want to fund through the hospital district from last year's funds. So that's being considered. Had a number of ministers' meetings. Councillor Caddick was on all those. Some of you missed them, so I'll just quickly fill you in on what I haven't filled in today. I think we spoke last time about Flynn Row and EMBC and talking about the seismic requirements of dikes. We spoke earlier about our childcare discussion. We also had a conversation with Minister Robinson, Minister of Affordable Housing, and laid out our plans for, or just basically set the table about our partnership with Sea to Sky Community Services and our hopeful project for affordable housing and working with them. Let them know that we'll be back to discuss that further, as well as a couple grant applications that fall under their ministry, such as the Park and Ride and the Affordable Housing Program. We spoke with Minister Heyman about, from Minister Environment, about Joffrey Lake, about resources for our campgrounds, something that we've talked about a lot at our table, so I don't have to elaborate on. I just sort of hammered that message home, that we're still looking for those resources. And we had a joint meeting with the Minister of Transportation, Minister Trevena, it was SLRD, RMOW, District of Squamish, myself, and just once again driving home the importance of our regional transit system and how, once again, we're not going away on that one, and that we hope to work with the current and future government to make it happen sooner than later. And along those notes, I was talking with the Mayor of Squamish yesterday or the day before. Premier Horgan was in Squamish for a little campaign rally, and there were some questions on regional transit, and she in her meeting with him, she meeting the Mayor of Squamish, Mayor Elliott, planted some good questions and let him know that if he is to be reelected, we will be shortly after re-election knocking on the door to say, hey, you just said that regional transit's important to our corridor. So what does that mean and how are you going to make that happen? So continuing to bang that drum as well. I've had a couple meetings with VCH. I missed the last one due to another conflicting meeting. And if there's anything, maybe CEO Gilmore could fill us in. But basically the meetings have been centered around the second wave, resources around the second wave, what kind of preparations are being done, what supports are being given to our doctors, numbers updates, and surgeries update, which, by the way, sounds quite positive. They've managed to catch up on quite a few surgeries, and they're managing to get a lot through the system as we speak. So that's good news. I've sent you the updates, but let me know if you have questions on that. I had a site meeting with Kevin Clark from the PVDD, Chief Dean, Councillor Maxine Bruce, and some other, and Councillor Bacatti, and some other members of Leewat Nation to look at the Grandmother Slough and the whole of it to see, how it affects our industrial park or could potentially impact our industrial park with flooding and beaver dams, all the way down. And how it affects Leewat Nation all the way down to the Lake Road. And there was a lot of buy-in there. We went and visited the beaver dams along Rancherie and along the reserve, and I've never seen anything like it. These beaver dams are 40 meters long, 8 meters wide. There's trees growing out of them. They're immense, they're huge, and they abandon a segment at a time once they've completely plugged it, and they keep moving along down the river. So, just seeing the water flow restricted to such tight little spots because of these beaver dams, it's crazy. So there was a really good conversation about that, really good general buy-in to work together on it to protect, like I say, right from our industrial park all the way up to the Lake Road. And also an agreement to work sort of what we call the bottom up. In other words, start to alleviate the pressure at the lake and work on the Grandmother Slough all the way up towards the industrial park so that we're not pushing problems downstream. I had a couple of meetings with Sea to Sky Community Services. I think I already reported on that, as well as a couple of meetings with our MP, Mr. Wheeler, and our local mayors. A lot of that was based on the throne speech and some of the funding that's coming through. Really quick recap. I think good news for our small businesses relief is that the wage subsidy will be extended probably right up until next spring or summer. The CERB, as we know, has ended. They've made some changes to the Canada Sickness Benefit and the Canada Recovery Recovery Care Benefit, as well as the EI changes, to try to open those up a little bit in the absence of CERB, but recognizing that a lot of people were getting paid to stay home. That's been canceled. As the CAO mentioned, there's a top-up of the Relief and Recovery Fund, as well as a Rapid Housing Initiative. So some good funding coming from the federal government. There's some new climate change legislation coming that I'm really anxious to see. There's going to be some budget items that will reflect retrofitting homes, disaster mitigation, which Mr. Wheeler was making sure to point that out directly to me because I've been asking about that regularly. So hopefully that'll help with some of our Lillooet River work, and as well as money towards childcare and transit and zero emission vehicles. And there's just discussion with the province in terms of how those subsidies and funds will get negotiated and distributed. But hopefully transit and childcare can trickle down to us in some form or another. Had some meetings with Chief Dean, just general informal stuff, and interest. The salmon count this year is at 5,100, which is a little bit lower than what was forecasted, and certainly lower than the 300,000 return that we saw 4 or 5 years ago. So not, speaking to some of the LEWAT members, not enough fish to go around. A lot of concern in that community with the fish numbers. And I think it's something we got to pay attention to. I spoke with Chief Dean. There's some interest with LEWAT Nation to build a hatchery on LEWAT Nation, and I said I would offer any support we could to make that happen. And last but certainly not least, I want to acknowledge the great sadness and great loss to our valley, to our community, of Miss Shirley Henry. We've all talked about this. I know it's all out there, but I have to mention this in my report. Shirley and George, and Shirley has been one of the most incredible contributors to our community. She's got her fingerprint on everything as you drive down the street or walk down our town. She's been involved in everything from the airport to economic development to the longest standing mayor to an alderman way back when they used to meet at the hotel, to on and on and on. And I've never met a couple, I've never met anybody like George and Shirley who would contribute so much and shy away so much from any recognition or acknowledgement of their contributions. They did it because, and Shirley did so much out of a love for this community, out of a belief in this community and the residents. I've said before, if I can contribute 5% to our community that she did over the years, I'd feel pretty good about myself. Again, she's got her fingerprint everywhere. So I just want to I'm hoping there's a celebration of life to come and further a chance to acknowledge Shirley and the Henrys. As we know, we've dedicated Henry Park in Tayada. I look forward to that opening and be able to make that formal dedication to acknowledge their contribution. I want to send my condolences on behalf of all of us to the Henry family, to all the friends and family, and also thank them for sharing Shirley with us over these years, because that's certainly what they did. So with that, that's the end of my report. I will turn it over to council reports. Any council reports? Councilor Craddock.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it short. We'll talk about the meetings with the minister. Other than say, I think staff and yourself, Mayor Richmond, did a great job in the presentation, so that was good. Had a Pembina Valley Diking District meeting. I'm going to shorten these up really short. We've got the dike inspection software system in place. It's up and running well, so Kevin's doing a great job pushing forward with that. Also, the VOP made an application for the Arn Canal grant for $750,000. There's a letter later on in here, but that's been approved, so that's going to go ahead. So that'll help with the integrated flood mitigation project that's online. Attended a Municipal Insurance Association of BC meeting, another Zoom meeting. It's, again, I'm going to shorten it up here. Last year, they settled 1,000 claims with 1,100 new ones coming forward. But with those claims, 85% were settled without payment. And that's incredible numbers. And at the present time, the equity position of the association is 87.5 million, which is a wonderful amount of money to have there, which also was kind of interesting. 131 members attended this meeting online. So there's a lot of interest in there, and it's pretty incredible to see. We had an economic development collaborative meeting. Again, I'll shorten it up. We have a draft plan coming hopefully later this month or early November, which will put us in the position to see where we're going to go going forward to get to the final draft. Certainly Veronica is doing a wonderful job keeping us together and doing this online, along with EcoPlan, and I think we'll probably find some good results coming out of there. Another item here, our economic development plan that we are doing here in Pemberton had identified an abattoir as part of a new business suggestion going forward. I can tell you that Al LeBlanc is 1 or 2 inspections away from having his completed and up and running. So I think that's really good news for the community. Attended the 40th Terry Fox Run, of which I've only missed one. So that was interesting. And I did see a number of other people out on the Sunday doing their fundraising and work on that. Had a conversation with Al McEwen of the Pemberton Wildlife Association, and he just wanted me to really reiterate that he and the organization are very interested in being involved in any land acquisition, whether it be fundraising, support with dollars, or negotiating, and would love to be kept in line if anything's going on with that. Mm-hmm. And the other nice thing is I just want to thank staff. They're in the process of doing line painting around the community right now, all the traffic calmers in some intersections. So nice to see that get done before winter settles in. I'll keep it short and sweet. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Craddock. Any other councillor reports?
I just wanted to also extend my condolences to Shirley Henry's family.
Thank you. Anyone else? That's everyone. Okay, we're getting there. It's been a long day. We're 7 hours plus in here, so thanks for holding out, everybody. We're on to correspondence for action. We've done that. So correspondence for information. I would like to pull out number 6, the letter from Fran and Bill Cuthbert. Is anybody else like to pull any item out? Could I get a motion to receive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 then?
Make a motion.
Seconded by Councillor Zant. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So yeah, item 6, it's regarding the development plans for 1409 Poplar Street. I just, we've seen a couple emails go back and forth, and I just thought maybe we could action this by having this referred to staff to contact the SD 48 to make sure that concerns are being met. Something along those lines. Councillor Antonelli.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think Fran has a few good points about how the benefits to the students may or may not have come about. I know that's, in part due to COVID, but I think when the rezoning was underway, I think we could have done a little bit more to secure some kind of amenity or benefit to the community through the rezoning process. So I think it is important that Fran has written in and pointed that out to us.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I agree that we could have been secured another community amenity through it. I think that there's a good educational component to it, but I do agree and want to make sure that the processes are being done respectfully and neighbors are being alerted to what they need to be alerted to, for sure. So maybe a motion to refer this to staff to contact the school district to review the application or review the file.
I'll move it.
Councillor Craddock, second by Councillor Zad. Further discussion? In favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Decision on late business. Councillor Craddock.
Yes, thank you. What I'd like to do is, excuse me, there's some situations developing in Sunstone where
we just need a resolution to consider late business.
A resolution to add hillside development guidelines discussion at Sunstone to the agenda.
Or under late business?
Or under late business, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay,
thank you. Seconded by Councillor Craddock. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Go ahead, Councillor Craddock.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking for some confirmation on what guidelines are being used in that area as far as the hillside development is concerned. There's people out there now that we're looking to build that have got their lots for sale because they've found that people across the street next door, down below them, have ended up building huge retaining walls, denuding the property completely, changing the look of the whole hillside development. And it's pretty sad to see these people coming to you with tears in their eyes saying that what they had put their life investment into has been lost with them having to sell their property and probably losing money. So I need to have clarification, and I'm sure the community needs clarification, because that project could very easily go sideways the way things are happening out there right now.
So what are you asking?
What I'm asking is for somebody in staff to clarify what the guidelines are for putting these huge retaining walls up, some as high as 25 and 30 feet tall, why it's being allowed when it's not in the hillside development guidelines.
Thank you.
If I could, this is actually found in the zoning bylaw, not the hillside design guidelines. And as you recall, I did provide a bit of an update on 2 that we're actively dealing with, where we placed stop work orders. And they have to go through a process by either going through the Board of Variance or coming to council for a variance, or taking it down if obviously it's not granted. So we, as Ms. Pedrini earlier addressed, we do have some amendments to housekeeping amendments to our zoning bylaw, which we will be bringing forward as well for council's discussion. Furthermore, we have reiterated with the developers in those areas that we have the hillside design guidelines now, and we've asked them to actively enforce on these, or not enforce, but to share this information with future purchasers. And we are actually going to follow up with a meeting with them to go over them again, just to make sure that in every capacity they're being followed. We do agree there are others we need to follow up on as well. I think there's 2 others that we need to do, and unfortunately they went in before our hillside development guidelines were in place, but they still need to meet the intent of our zoning bylaw.
So I wonder if I could just request as a way to appease new buyers in that area so we keep the project going along. Could we advise the real estate companies that there is this situation, and they can advise buyers so they don't buy in there and then find something like this happening? There's a couple houses that are built out there already that basically look like they're in a hole now because of what's happened. It doesn't feel good when you're hit with this every time you go out in that area to have a look around.
In fairness, you know, those retaining walls were, we've got specifications on that, and some builders went ahead and did that above and beyond what is permitted through our guidelines.
Sorry, the zoning bylaw.
Or sorry,
bylaw.
Our bylaw.
Which is more restrictive.
So we do have those guidelines within our bylaw that restrict those, that, because we didn't want that. We've discussed this as a group before. We didn't want to denude and scar that hillside and have a bunch of overly imposing walls.
Mm-hmm.
So that is in our bylaw. Some builders have chosen to perhaps not pay attention to that. And I would say that it is up to a prospective buyer to do their due diligence and find out what those restrictions are before they go ahead and buy and start designing construction on there, because I think it is pretty clearly laid out. There have been a couple of things that have gone on, but I feel those guidelines and that bylaw is pretty clearly laid out, and it's up to a prospective buyer to do their homework on that as well. So I don't know how much we're expecting staff to put that information out. That information is available. We have put those restrictions out in an effort to keep the hillside as landscaped and as wild as possible. So yeah, I'm just not too sure how much it's up to staff, or it's how much it's up to real estate agents and buyers to figure that out as well.
And I appreciate your comments, because that's what the public wants to hear, Mayor Richmond, is what you've just reiterated. And what the administrators also said. So if people can be more aware of what's going on, I think that's a big thing, because we don't want that to be a scar on the community.
Absolutely not. And it's a beautiful hillside, and we want it developed in the best way possible. So appreciate your comments. If there's nothing else on that, notice of motion. Question period. Ellie, do we have anybody in crowd that would like to ask? No.
There's no public in attendance.
I know I just got a text from Mr. Falloon that he lost his signal or whatever, and he'd like to connect later, but there's nobody else.
No.
Hearing none, I will look for I will look for a motion to, no, we got to recess and go back into camera. Go back in camera quickly. So a motion to go back in camera, moved by Councillor Zant, second by Councillor Noble. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Thank you to the public that attended this evening.